This conference will now be recorded.
Agnesa, that is the best laugh. That is the best laugh. All right. Very good, folks. So it's very therapeutic to laugh, I have to tell you, especially with all the stresses of life. Oh man, it's good to laugh. So, all right. So, folks, what I have here, and I don't have it on the board, but I do have, everybody has these sheets. So, spinal cord injury. So, those of you online, I'm going to make sure that they're posted in documents and resources and such. And it'll be like in one full document with the 4 handouts. So this way you can access them all at one shot and print them out and look at them. It's hard. I know it's hard to see posted like this, so it's okay. So today we are going to be looking at and beginning with chapter 13, the nervous system. Okay. So chapter 13, nervous system. This is a fascinating chapter, folks. So one thing right off the bat, right? So everybody's doing good on their quizzes. I'm really pleased with how well the class is doing with your quizzes and such. Remember, you have your PowerPoints. You're able to look at them. You're able to review things with that. Any questions? Always shoot me an email and such, or during lab time, right? During lab time, we'll have questions, but not during lecture. So no, it's all good. But yeah, so please make sure that you're asking questions and such, and I want to help you. Okay, so there we go. But the nervous system, folks, this is a fascinating chapter, and then we're going to be looking at special senses. So you're going to enjoy that also, as far as just how interesting it is, as far as how your body does what it does. But what I don't want you to come away with it is that and get all stressed out of like how complex it can be. Okay. Again, this is a non-science major class, so as such, I bring it down to your level, and I don't try to make it so challenging that it's undoable, right? We want you to be able to enjoy this and to learn and to really enjoy understanding and learning about the human body. That's what this class is about, right? Helping you to take a lab science course and helping to give you an interesting course for you to understand a little bit about regarding the human body. And what I wanted to start off with today was really just sharing with you some things regarding like pathology and such, and what goes on as far as how this wonderful nervous system, which is the master controller over what goes on in the body, right? So your brain and spinal cord, so write this down. Your brain and spinal cord are the central nervous system. So your brain and the spinal cord, CNS, the central nervous system. All else, folks, is the PNS, the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so the nerves that when you think of, oh, I pinched a nerve and I've got issues with radiating down into my arm or down my leg and such, that's the peripheral nervous system. Okay, anything that's not the brain or the spinal cord is the peripheral nervous system, right? And so what you're seeing here as far as spinal cord injuries with this fact sheet and such. And so I'll talk in more detail regarding, but know that the extension of the brain is the spinal cord. And then the spinal cord has the peripheral nervous system that branches off of. Understand also that there are what are called cranial nerves. And these are nerves that branch directly off of the brain, and pretty wild. And many of them are responsible for our special senses, our ability to see, our ability to smell and hear and such, and taste. Yeah, these are all branches from these cranial nerves that come directly off of the brain. Pretty amazing stuff. And like I said, next chapter, we'll be talking a little bit more detail regarding special senses. Spinal cord injuries, when you think about this, folks, right? So you might have watched football or any type of sports and seen someone down on the field as a result of an injury, and they could have actually caused some type of spinal cord injury. How about if a player has a football helmet on, right? They got the helmet on and such, and they're down and they're going up against someone else, And imagine like that the heads come together and butt together. Imagine that that can be what's called a compression type injury, right? Now they're padded, they're very muscular, they're at the peak of their profession and such, and so they really, you know, they're less apt to injury than you or I. So we are more prone to injury in doing the same type of activity, right? Because of just their training and their conditioning and such. Still, these things still happen and such, and so the ability to damage the spine, damage the contents that are being protected by the spine, remarkable stuff, and really can be quite devastating. How about people that are involved in car accidents and they end up getting just something as a whiplash injury? Or how about something worse? How about you take a fall or being involved in a car accident, and not only do you just get a whiplash injury, but you actually have fractures of the spine, which can also cause impingement or damage to the spinal cord or whatever spinal nerves that are coming off of the spinal cord. It's bad stuff, folks. So look at our model in the back here, right? This is our articulated skeleton that we'll come back to again. And amazing how we have the brain protected by the skull, the spinal cord and the spinal cord contents protected by the spine. It's remarkable, right? It's really, so think about this. How cool is this that we have all this flexibility that we can do, right? This range of motion. We can bend forward, we can extend back, we can rotate, we can side bend or lateral bend, right? Lateral flex. We have all this tremendous ability to move, and yet it's still protecting the cord, which is, folks, right? The cord itself, you know, around like the size of my thumb, as far as the width is concerned. So take a look at your thumb and just imagine that that's your cord. That's the cord. And if that gets severed, so here's the deal. If the cord is severed from here up, you're gonna have problems with what? The whole body. Think about that. Everything below this is going to be affected. So upper extremities, lower extremities, right? So, and if it's damaged and it's totally cut, you're going to end up having, you'd be quadriplegic, right? So this would be an effect as far as you can't move, upper extremities, lower extremities, can't walk, right? Terrible. Now, there are these cranial nerves, folks, that are also, again, like I said, coming from the brain, that directly off of the brain, that can also help to innervate, send bioelectricity to, look over here, to the abdominal, pelvic organs and the thoracic organs, right? So you have your lungs, your heart, right deep to these rib cage here. So you can still, even if you have this major injury where you're quadriplegic, you can still have nerve flow going to the organs in the chest and in the abdominal pelvic region, and they can still be functioning. Right? It's pretty remarkable because of this cranial nerve called the vagus nerve. Okay? So pretty remarkable. But how about, folks, so think about this for a moment. How about if I damage anywhere from here, thoracic, so the lower, to the lumbar region? If I damage the cord here or I sever the cord here, what's it going to affect? It's going to affect what's going on up and through in here. Well, really this affects what's going on here and below. So if I'm below here, paraplegic, right? So you have issues with the lower extremities and such and being able to walk, right? So spinal cord injuries, folks. Let's look and see causes of spinal cord injury. 46% motor vehicle accidents, 22% falls. So does that not like shock you a little bit? Like that's amazing, right? So falls can be anything from falling from a ladder, and over my years in practice and also as a young man, as a kid, you know, growing up and such, we knew people who had fallen from high ladders, right? And one in particular I can think of died. Another, he ended up, he was able to walk afterwards, but a lot of spine injury, spinal pain and difficulty moving and such for many, many years, for actually his whole life. But folks, so falls. So also this can be, you know, really can encompass, how about falling down some stairs, right? It's just as, or how about we have someone who's an older patient who their bones are they have osteoporosis or osteopenia. The bone density is not as strong, right? Not as strong and dense as it should be. And so they just take a little bit of a fall just from standing, and they fall, and they can have issues with the spine. Okay, if they twist the wrong way and such, or they can even, just because of the bone density being so weak, folks, it's not that they fall and they fracture their hip, it's that they twist and then they fracture their hip and then they go down. Understand? So it's not just a matter of just a fall causing that, and then in turn can affect the spine and what's going on with that. 16% violence. I was just talking to a gentleman just the other day, and we were talking, I was just asking him about his situation and what he was interested in doing as far as school was concerned. And he talked to me about that. He was attacked from behind and had major damage to his cervical spine, his neck, to the point where he has had multiple surgeries, can't do the profession that he was in originally, and now he needs to go to school and do something different and such. But he's still like, he's in pain, chronic pain, and I mean, wow, right? So violence, 16%, and then sports, 12%. Would you have thought, let me ask in the class just by raising hands, who would have thought number 2 would have been sports? To be honest, just thinking about it, I think it would have been me. I would have thought that sports and falls would have been closer together, to be honest. Yeah, but that's quite interesting. The average age for spinal cord injury, almost 29 years old, right? And you know what? I have to look at the chart because, okay, yeah. So 29 years old for male, 40 for female. That's where I'm looking, because I'm looking down below. And spinal cord injury by gender, 80.1% or 80.8, almost 81% males, 19.2% females. Types of spinal cord injury. Yes, go ahead. How about rugby? Right? There's other sports too that are, how about lacrosse? These are also other pretty, like pretty full contact sports. And like football, you're wearing pads. Rugby, you're not wearing pads. Lacrosse, you're wearing some pads, but not as much as a football player. Hockey, you're wearing a lot of pads, right? I went to a boxing match and a hockey game broke out. You ever hear that one, right? Like the fights all the time, right? But like, so these are all like sports where contact and such, right? And so, but I would think, and I don't know, and I'd have to look it up, if football was probably one of the, yeah, you would think. Look at this here, 30.1% incomplete quadriplegia, 25.6% complete paraplegia, 20.4% complete quadriplegia, and 18.4% incomplete paraplegia. So again, we're talking about quadriplegic, all 4 extremities. Paraplegia, 2 of the extremities. Usually and it would be the lower extremities. Yeah, so I don't. So here's the thing: there are folks that are quadriplegics that still have some type of, a little minimal ability to move and minimal sensations, I would say. So like, so even like an incomplete quadriplegia, quadruped, they wouldn't really probably be able to walk. That's what I'm going to tell you. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, so that's interesting, right? So peripheral nerves, they'll heal, right? When we look at the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, this is the rub. This is what all research is going after as far as trying to get stem cells to differentiate into neurons and nerve tissue so that we could repair damaged nerves, right? So that's a big deal. Good question. Yeah, everybody, good questions, good input. Now let's go to multiple sclerosis. Let me pull that one up on our multiple. So I'm just kind of give you a little bit of information just to kind of whet your interest in trying to think of, maybe you might want to review or do one of these for your project. Multiple sclerosis. So as we're looking at multiple sclerosis, I want you to think in terms of any of the electrical equipment that you have in your home that's plugged in, right? or even things that are not plugged in, but they still have wires present within, even if they're wireless. So like they think of your phone, there's still connections, there's still electrical connections that are taking place. But I really want you to think more in terms of like the wiring. So think about your home and the wiring in your home. You're able to plug into outlets and such, right? And those wires are insulated. There's either plastic or there's rubber covering those wires, so they're not bare wires, right? That's important, okay? When we think of multiple sclerosis, and then go to the next one, just so you can see it, Guillain-Barré, right? Both of these are demyelinating disorders, meaning that the insulation that insulates nerves, and not all nerves, but many, and especially if you want a nerve to send quick information very fast, right? That would be myelinated nerves. They'd be insulated nerves. Demyelinating means that somehow there's something going on, there's a process going on. In the case of multiple sclerosis, it's an autoimmune disorder where the body is actually attacking this covering, this myelin sheaths, and it's affecting many things. So let's take a look at that one for first off. So multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease that affects the central nervous system, okay? In Guillain-Barré, it's going to affect the peripheral nervous system. Incidence, the most common age to be diagnosed, excuse me, with MS is between 20 and 40. And I think many of us would know someone or maybe have a relative or some that this is not uncommon, unfortunately. I have a cousin who was about 10 years older than myself, and going back when he was like late 20s, early 30s, I don't remember exactly, he was diagnosed with MS, and he's still with us and he's still active, but he's in a wheelchair and it's been tough. It's not been easy for him, for sure. But you'll see there between 20 and 40, and that's very common. Worldwide, it is estimated that there are around 2.5 million cases of people with MS. In the US alone, approximately 200 new cases are diagnosed each week. That's not a good thing, right? Now, understand that this can affect many issues. So look at the symptoms. Look at all the way to the bottom right. Fatigue, you're tired a lot. Vision problems, numbness and tingling. And that vision problems and numbness and tingling, these are some of the early symptoms that patients will express when first being diagnosed, okay? Muscle spasms, stiffness and weakness in the musculature. Mobility problems, being able to have difficulty moving around. Pain, problems with thinking and learning and planning. Depression and anxiety. So it's a devastating disorder. Go to Guillain-Barré, and I would tell you that it's a pretty rare disorder in comparison. You'll see here that it's a rare neurological disorder that happens when the immune system attacks the peripheral nerves, right? And I said the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is made up of nerves that branch out from the brain and spinal cord, again, the central nervous system, which sends and receives impulses from organs and other parts of the body. You'll see here 1 in 100,000 people are affected by it. The cause, the etiology, we're not sure, to be honest. Could be as a result of an infection, could not. We know this though, that the majority of people who experience Guillain-Barré syndrome get a recovery, which is quite remarkable. And again, the question was asked before, does the nervous tissue heal? In the peripheral nervous system, it does. In the central nervous system, not at this point that we can see. Okay. Not inherited, not infectious. So you'll see here, as a consequence of damage to the myelin sheath, that insulation, the brain is unable to transmit electrical signals to the muscles properly, causing weakness. Pins and needles are definitely that pins and needle type of sensation. Have you ever sat on your leg or pushed on your arm and and it feels like quote unquote it fell asleep? Right. So that can be either the sensation that type of sensation can be as a result of lack of blood flow to an area, or impingement of blood flow to the area, or issues with the nervous system. Okay, so those are associated with that. Now understand, if you have pins and needles, this paresthesia we would call this, it doesn't mean, oh my gosh, I've got MS or I've got Guillain-Barré. There are other issues, there are other factors that can cause that type of sensation. So don't, because I know now you start to like learn more information. You're like, oh, I've got that. It's like, you know, make sure you get diagnosed by, you know, a qualified person there before you start thinking about that. And lastly here, I'm showing you leprosy, right? So I think I talked about leprosy, but understand that leprosy also can affect the peripheral nervous system. And this can be a devastating disorder. And here's the thing, and I'll provide these also for you all online, so that this way you could even make this bigger so that you can see it easier as far as what's on here with this fact sheet. But know that, so armadillos, do you know what an armadillo is? Armadillo, right? They're kind of like, they're humped and they're kind of like this, like almost like this plate armor on them, right? So they are carriers, right, of leprosy. Know that, like, so around here, do you see many armadillos? No, because it's not their habitat. We do see, and which is cool, porcupines. Have you ever seen a porcupine out in the wild? I have. It's wild. It's pretty. I mean, literally is wild. It's pretty cool. But armadillos, right? So out in like out west and like Texas and south, what would happen would be that some people would like pick them up, or some people would pick them up and eat them. You know, they'd bring them home and cook them and eat them, and then they'd get this bacterial infection that is really a nasty infection and can take up to, or maybe even over, a year to fix, to get healed from, to handle that infection. Yeah, so pretty nasty infection. All right, folks, so kind of giving you a little bit of an input there regarding some of these different disorders and what can affect the nervous system. So just kind of give you a little bit of an idea there as far as some very interesting things that can occur with the nervous system. We're going to now go to our PowerPoint. Where are we at? Here we go. All right, so chapter 13, the nervous system. So I talked to you already about the brain and spinal cord being the central nervous system. Now we're going to look at, and we did mention to you all in a earlier chapter regarding, we're talking about tissues. We're talking about tissues and talking about nervous tissue and what's present as far as the cells are concerned. So recall that I said to you that a neuron is a nerve cell, right? These are very specialized nerve cells. And that support cells are called glial cells. And they are also very important as far as supporting the neuron. So let's take a look at this slide here. And you'll see that it says sensory neurons, interneurons, and motor neurons. Now, I'm going to turn off my mic for a moment. Okay, back on. All right, so you'll see here that, and think about this for a moment and you'll kind of get it. With the nervous system, we have to receive information, the brain will process it, and then it's going to send out what the response should be to whatever has been received. So we have these sensory neurons that are receiving information, they're collecting information about stimuli, some type of information. The interneurons are between the brain and the spinal cord. They receive signals and send signals to other neurons. And then the motor neurons are, this is what's going to actually be this output that's going to be telling the body what it needs to do in response to the input that's been received. Think about this for a moment. My hand, I touch something hot, just to stay on whatever's hot. Right away, I touch it and I move it away very quickly. That's called a reflex. And it eventually will, it does send information to the brain, but first it sends information to the spinal cord, which will in turn allow for my hand to move away from that, whether it's a hot object, whether it's a sharp, how about a tack? Have you ever, or anybody that has kids or kids in the family, and you're walking in the living room and you step on like a Lego or something sharp and you're like, you know, you're like, you move, you quickly raise up and you might fall on the ground. I don't know, you know, just something like, and then you're like, brr, 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 brr. Anyway, but you know, it's not fun, right? You know, it's like, it's fun afterwards because you're like, look at them, you know, but really like it's, you know, it's uncomfortable. And what happens is that you don't just step on it and you like really compress down on whatever it is. as soon as your body experiences some type of pain, right, it like moves right off of it and such. And that's a protective reflex that goes on as far as this withdrawal type of reflex, okay? So let's go to the next slide here. And then the next slide here, we're looking at as far as seeing that we have the sensory input, the interneurons, and then the motor neurons sending the output. So we're receiving information, we're processing it, and then we're sending out a response to that information that's been received. And you'll see here that there is present in this example that we have actual myelin sheath, actual covering, actually myelin sheath, and actually we'll call it different things depending upon whether it's in the central nervous system or in the peripheral nervous system. Okay, but we'll hold off on that for now. Let's go to the next slide, and we're just seeing it in a little bit more detail and close up as far as what's going on. As far as that, you'll see here the neuron is all the way, as you guys are looking at this, to your left, the bottom lower left of this image. You're seeing the neuron. What's in the middle here, this dark area? That's a nucleus, right? The cell body is called a soma. The neuron cell body is called a soma. And the dendrites are receiving information. They're receiving information, and the axon is sending out information. Okay? This bioelectricity, we call it a couple different things. We call it graded potentials for the dendrites, action potentials for the axon. Graded potential, action potential. It's this bioelectricity that's produced by the body. It's pretty remarkable. These are the dendrites. Yep, the graded potential, the dendrites. So the graded potentials, dendrites. The action potential, the axon. And what you're seeing here is that neurons conditions for signaling. So neurons are excitable. So this is very interesting that this is how they respond to this electrical input, this input. So you see response to certain stimuli by producing an electrical signal, okay? And that's that graded or action potential. We're going to see there that there is movement of these ions, right? There are, so think sodium, think potassium, right? You've all heard this, right? Sodium, potassium, they're present within different drinks that you may drink, right? For electrolytes, they're present in vitamins and such, and the foods that we eat, right? These are important. These will move from outside of the cell to inside of the cell and cause some changes that will help to produce this action potential, this graded potential. How about everybody stand for a moment? Everybody stand for a moment. We've been sitting for too long, so let's just stand for a moment. Just take a quick 1 minute stretch, right? Just stretch it out a little bit. Good. There you go. Yeah, I know it's hard sitting there. I know. Yeah, it's not easy. All right. So coming back to what's going on the slide, right? So the resting neuron. There are channels. Now look at the door for a moment over here. Look at the door, right? There are channels that, think about it like a door. They act like a door. Some of them will have a door, we would say gated. They'll have a gate, and they'll open in response to some type of stimuli, okay? Some are a gate that's always open. So say if you have little kids in your home and you have a gate, yeah, more than likely they're not closing the gate if there's not a spring and it's always open. But understand that there are channels, there are gates, there are non-gated channels, right? These are open channels. They're always open and there's always movement of materials. Now, well, what's the big deal? Who cares? Here's the thing. For your nervous system to work, for your muscles to work, there has to be movement of substances, sodium ions, potassium ions, in order for electricity to go from one area to another, in order for electricity to go from the brain and spinal cord to your muscles so that they can do what they can do, and also to your glands and to your organs. Without this electricity, this is not a good thing, right? You'll end up having organs that can die, muscles that won't work, right? This is not good. So we need to have this movement and understand this, that these ions in particular will move from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration, okay? This is called diffusion. Have you ever heard that before, diffusion? You've experienced this though, because say you have a cologne or a perfume or say a deodorant spray, right? And you do this, you spray it. Now, if I did it in the front of the room, right? What would happen is that it's like concentrated here, high concentration, but then over time, what will happen? It diffuses out into the room. That's going from high concentration to low concentration, and you don't need any energy to do that. You understand? It just moves down this gradient from one area where it's higher to another area where it's lower. Does that make sense to you all? It's called diffusion, okay? So it's important to get that so that this way, no energy is required, and we just move from high concentration to low, and there's this movement of these ions, and it allows to produce this electricity. So you'll see here that on the bottom of this page, it says, difference is the resting membrane potential in the extracellular environment from the intracellular environment. So let's look up here at the board. Let's just talk about these terms for a moment here. Here. Okay, so here I have a cell. Here's the nucleus. Here's the cytoplasm. The line that keeps everything inside is the plasma membrane, or we could call it the cell membrane. Inside of the cell is the intracellular region. And so we would say that inside of the cell, the intracellular fluid. Outside of the cell is the extracellular fluid. So inside of the cell is what? Intracellular. Outside of the cell, extracellular. It's outside of the cell, it's not inside. Well, the differences in concentration of, I just mentioned to you, potassium ions and sodium ions, when there's a difference between them, right? There's a potential, there's this difference, there's this resting membrane potential, and when I change it by moving these ions, I'm able to produce electricity. Now, does that sound like the weirdest thing ever? Yeah, it's pretty weird. It is pretty strange, right? But this is how the body does what it does. This is how your muscles are able to contract, right? Your skeletal muscles. This is how your organs are able to do what they can do by functioning, because they're receiving this electricity. Your brain can communicate with the body via these action potentials, these graded potentials. It's this bioelectricity. I want to keep it as like simple as that for you all. Just and even in that, I know it's like, what? You know, it's weird. It's different. It's not a very easy concept to understand, but this is what it is. Is anybody here in the class on campus do any of you have any experience with working with electricity? Like anybody have somebody? Okay, so what is your experience with that? Okay, for how long? Okay, all right. So does this kind of make a little bit of sense, like this potential and this ability to movement and the insulation that's needed to, you don't want just bare wire. If you have bare wire, so I'll tell you an interesting story. So in practice, when I was practicing for all those years as a chiropractor, I had many patients were farmers because I was out in a rural community. And so one patient had told me about an experience where on the farm, they had a cord, an extension cord, right? An extension cord going to something, and it was outside. And over time, there was some wear and tear that took place on a couple of aspects of the cord, of the extension cord. And so there was bare wire. And one day, the person was just walking. They touched the bare wire of this extension cord that had electricity flowing through it. And they touched it with their bare foot. And what happened? They went down right away. She initially didn't know what happened and was like, did I just get shot or something? No, it was, I mean, think about that, right? I mean, I don't know, right? Kind of weird. But what happened was that she was electrocuted briefly. And what happened was that contraction of the musculature happened like that, and she went down, right? It wasn't insulated. Now know this, that, like I said, the insulation will protect us, right? And it also allows for better movement of the electricity. Question or comment? Sure, go, please. Really? Interesting. I know 220. Yeah, 220, you wouldn't want to do that. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, indeed. You know, so like a dryer or like an oven that's electric would be like 220, and that would be quite a different story than the 110. All right, now let's just look here. So as you're looking at this next image, this is kind of just what I was explaining to you as far as that there's a difference in concentration inside of the cell in comparison to outside of the cell. We would call it a gradient, a concentration gradient. Concentration gradient. So again, all that means is just that there's a difference between inside of the cell and outside of the cell regarding those sodium and potassium ions. And you'll see there that you can see that we have these channels present in the plasma membrane that allow for movement to take place between what's outside of the cell and what's inside of the cell. And some, like in the middle, those are always open. Those are, we would call them leak channels. Let's see, right here. They're always open. But then we have gated channels, and then we have other channels that will move the materials in an opposite direction because you need energy to do this. And this one right over here all the way to the left, this one moves material against its concentration gradient. Instead of going from high to low, it's going to need energy to move it from low to high. That's just a part of this whole process of what goes on as far as with movement of material and creating this electricity, this bioelectricity. Now, go to the next slide here. And you'll see here that we have these action potentials that I talked to you about earlier. Give me one moment here. I just want to look at right. So you'll see here that nerve impulses are generated when a signal causes neurons resting membrane potential to reverse. So all that just means is that, let's go back to this other image for just a moment here. This one. Outside of the cell, right close to this plasma membrane, it's a little bit positive. Inside, it's a little bit negative. Okay, so look over in the middle part of the board here. Now, this line represents the plasma membrane. This line represents the plasma membrane. Outside of the cell has a very slight positive charge. Inside of the cell has a slight negative charge. Just think about it like that. And this is the resting membrane potential. This is normal. This is just regular, nothing's going on, no electricity is being produced. But when we cause a change to take place, and it goes from positive to negative on the outside, and then the inside it goes from negative to positive, that change in the membrane potential, this is what allows for this electricity to be produced. Okay. Simple as that. That allows for that electricity to be produced, this bioelectricity, this change from positive and negative, positive on the outside, negative on the inside, it switches. The polarity switches. Okay? And as a result, this electricity then can be produced, and it can send signals from one area to another area. And this is how the body works with that. Kind of weird, a little bit strange, a little bit different, but this is how the body works. So let's come back to the next slide again and just see here that. So the resting membrane potential, it reverses. And so it becomes negative on the outside, positive on the inside. And it moves down along plasma membrane. Now, action potentials travel away from their starting point. So if we look at this image right here, so the action potential travels here like this. It starts here and it moves away. And it always will move away. Okay, so it starts at one spot at the cell body, at the soma, and it travels away. Okay? So it only goes in one direction. So it begins here, right here, and it'll travel in only one direction, the action potential. They travel away from their starting point and go to whether we're communicating between two neurons or between neuron and a muscle, or neuron and a gland. Now you see here that neurons cannot fire again until the rest. So this is important that there's like a little bit of a lag that'll take place, and we're going to keep on moving because I don't want to get too bogged down with this, because I don't want to just make you more confused. But see here, look at this image here. This image is good in that it's showing you positive on the outside, negative on the inside. As a result of those ions moving back and forth, sodium and potassium moving, it causes a change from positive on the outside to negative on the outside, from negative on the inside to positive. That change is what's helped produce this electricity, this electrical event. Now, I'm going to move down. I'm passing by a few slides here. Here we go. Now, you'll see it says here, action potentials stimulate neurons to release neurotransmitters. Do you remember I said to you that you know like dopamine, you know serotonin. You've heard those terms used before. Those are types of neurotransmitters. How about epinephrine, norepinephrine? Have you heard of that before? Does anybody have any issues with do you carry an EpiPen? Anybody allergic to getting stung? Okay, yeah. So you use that in order to help prevent you from going into a shock type situation, which can be life-threatening. Okay, but epinephrine, norepinephrine. How about these terms? Adrenaline, noradrenaline. You've probably heard adrenaline before, right? And so it's very important. These are these neurotransmitters. Acetylcholine. Do you remember when we were looking at muscle and we said the nervous system and the muscle? It's called the neuromuscular junction. The nerve-muscle junction doesn't touch. There's a space that allows for chemicals to be released. And those chemicals released, and that causes and contributes to a muscle to contract. Let's see. Let's go down one more slide, and then we're going to stop and take a break, only because I've given you a lot of information that's kind of pretty intense, and I need you to take a break for a little bit. Come back, I'll give you a little bit more, and then we'll start doing some more lab work. All right, so I just want you to be able to notice this one right here. Look at this image right in the middle. That's that right here, folks, online. Right here. That's that neuromuscular junction. That's that nerve muscle junction right here. And those chemicals released, that neurotransmitter, it's called acetylcholine, that's what contributes to the whole event that's going to cause for a skeletal muscle to contract. Very important. All right, we're going to stop recording for a moment, for 15 minutes. Stop recording.
This conference will now be recorded.
All right, okay, so we're back from the break. And so here I want to just make mention to you again, remember this, the neuromuscular junction, the nerve muscle junction. Recall that I said to you that venom, so like snake venom, or how about like a spider venom also? Can it affect this neuromuscular junction and cause paralysis? Can this paralysis be a problem that could actually cause issues with your ability to breathe and such? Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that, like, the neuromuscular junction, you know, you're in class and you're like, oh, like my head hurts from the information. But here's the thing though, like, this is something that's real world type stuff though. You know, imagine you, I have my daughter and son-in-law and their family, they live out past Scranton in Pennsylvania, right? Not too far from where we live, about an hour, 15 away. And they have a rattlesnake roundup every year, right? Now, understand like that, so venom from a snake, you get bit, that venom transfers into your body, right? That can be a problem. That can be a major problem. And not only just where some venom can actually cause very bad damage. So like the brown recluse spider, have you ever seen what damage it does locally? It's nasty, it's terrible. But we're talking about here more affecting like neuromuscular junction. So this is like not just stuff that's like, well, you know, doctors need to know this. You all can have an understanding of it because, you know, hey, you come in contact with spiders and snakes and such, and, you know, who knows whatever happens, but this gives you a little bit more understanding of what can happen as a result. Now, neuromuscular junction. Now let's go to the next slide here. And this is talking about at that neuromuscular junction, remember I said to you that acetylcholine, right up here, acetylcholine, that's a neurotransmitter, a nerve chemical, okay? This nerve chemical, important. We talked about, we mentioned that dopamine, serotonin, we'll look at that in a moment, but you all have probably heard those before. So acetylcholine is another one. You heard of epinephrine, norepinephrine, because you've heard of adrenaline, noradrenaline. You've heard of adrenaline before, I'm sure. And so these have specific effects on the human body, and they're really important. And when they're not being released, so say in the case of an issue where you're stung by a spider, or bit by a spider, bit by a snake, affecting that neuromuscular junction, preventing acetylcholine from moving across, right? So that you can have that muscle contraction, that's a problem. Look at where it says epinephrine or adrenaline, right? This is something that, you know, when you are in a situation where it's a fight or flight type situation, it's a situation where maybe you were involved in a car accident, and like you're just like, all like you're okay, but you're just like, you've been involved in this terrible thing and you're just like jacked. and like, you know, your adrenaline is pumping, it's being released because it's your body's mechanism to protect you and to keep you safe. Or how about you're at a club and someone starts a fight? Do you think that adrenaline starts going in through you like, holy cow, either I got to run away from this situation or I've got to like duke it out with somebody, which I hope you don't have to duke it out with someone, but if you had to, you better be prepared. And that adrenaline, that kind of gives you that. Folks, how about you've worked out? You work out, right? And what do you see? Like some of these people are really working out. They're like, ah! You know, they're like yelling and they're doing different things, right? Right? What are they trying to stimulate their body? They're trying to, I'm sorry. But they're trying to initiate this sympathetic response, which will in turn release what? Epinephrine, adrenaline into the body, which like gets you like, you know, gets all hyper. Okay. So, yes.
So, do they give epinephrine if you're having like an asthma attack?
Yeah. So they can do this, right? So like we were talking about, like say you get stung by a bee and you're allergic, you're very allergic to bees or wasps or something along those lines. Yeah. So this is a mechanism to try and help you fight and help you not go into shock. So it's important. Now, look at dopamine. Dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine reduces excitatory effects of other neurotransmitters, nerve chemicals, has roles in memory, learning, and really in learning, this is important. Just think about this for a moment because it helps to give a sense of like, oh, like a good feeling. And so like when you're doing something and you're learning something and having that positive feeling and such, this will help you to learn whatever it is that you're trying to learn. Fine motor coordination. Now, how about dopamine in the case of its role in addiction, right? In addictive behavior. So let's take a little, we're going to take a moment away from this for a moment here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'm going to have those that are online, you're going to be able to watch the screen here in the computer. So let's go to, we're going to watch 2 short videos, okay? So, and how about after this, if that's okay, all right, good. All right, folks, so let's take a look at this. I'm going to do this. All right, let me just make sure that the volume is up. Okay, please don't fall asleep as the lights are out. Okay.
Addiction is a neurological disorder that affects the reward
Short video,
system
short
of the
video.
brain. In a healthy person, the reward system reinforces important behaviors that are essential for survival, such as eating, drinking, sex, and social interaction. For example, the reward system ensures that you reach for food when you are hungry because you know that after eating, you will feel good. In other words,
And the smile. It's too funny, right?
You want to do it again and again whenever you feel hungry. Drugs of abuse hijack the system, turning the person's natural needs into drug needs. The brain consists of billions of neurons, or nerve cells, which communicate via chemical messages, or neurotransmitters. When a neuron is sufficiently stimulated, an electrical impulse called an action potential is generated and travels down the axon to the nerve terminal. Here, it triggers the release of a neurotransmitter into the synaptic cleft, the space between neurons. The neurotransmitter then binds to a receptor on a neighboring neuron, generating a signal in it, thereby transmitting the information to that neuron. The major reward pathways involve transmission of the neurotransmitter dopamine from the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, of the midbrain to the limbic system and the frontal cortex. Engaging in enjoyable activities.
So that limbic system, just so that you know, it's the emotional brain. When you think of things that are involved in your emotions and such, that's really like, that's very much a part of that limbic system. And so this is why, you know, you'll have feelings of that, there'll be some special type feelings, whether they're good or bad feelings, that'll be associated with, you know, in particular addiction. Question, Ellie?
So for depression, if you have like depression, would that mean something's wrong with that area?
So more, yeah, and so more we're even thinking like the way they've been treating for many years too is with serotonin and such. And so, but we'll get a little bit into that a little bit later. Okay.
Generates action potentials in dopamine-producing neurons of the VTA. This causes dopamine release from the neurons into the synaptic space. Dopamine then binds to and stimulates dopamine receptor on the receiving neuron. This stimulation by dopamine is believed to produce the pleasurable feelings or rewarding effects. Dopamine molecules are then removed from the synaptic space and transported back into the transmitting neuron by a special protein called dopamine transporter. Most drugs of abuse increase the level of dopamine in the reward pathway. Some drugs such as alcohol, heroin, and nicotine indirectly excite the dopamine-producing neurons in the VTA so that they generate more action potentials. Cocaine acts at the nerve terminal. It binds to dopamine transporter and blocks the reuptake of dopamine. Methamphetamine, a psychostimulant, acts similarly to cocaine in blocking dopamine removal. In addition, it can enter the neuron into the dopamine-containing vesicles, where it triggers dopamine release even in the absence of action potentials. Different drugs act in different ways, but the common outcome is that dopamine builds up in the synapse to a much greater amount than normal. This causes a continuous stimulation, maybe overstimulation of receiving neurons, and is responsible for prolonged and intense euphoria experienced by drug users. Repeated exposure to dopamine surges caused by drugs eventually desensitizes the reward system. The system is no longer responsive to everyday stimuli. The only thing that is rewarding is the drug. That is how drugs change the person's life priority. After some time, even the drug loses its ability to reward, and higher doses are required to achieve the rewarding effect. This ultimately leads to drug overdose.
Okay. So that's pretty sobering when you see that, right? I mean, honestly, like, like, I mean, it's a play on words, so to speak, but like, think about it though. Does it not like really shock you though? Like, this is what's going on with the body. And really, honestly, whatever drug it may be, whatever, alcohol, substance that you're drinking, whatever, however you're getting this, whether you're smoking it, drinking it, eating it, whatever it may be, right? Because mushrooms and such also can have these type of effects, right? So whatever it is that you're taking in, realize that over time, you're going to need more and more of it to make the difference. And then this can, again, eventually lead to the overdose situation. And also understand that it's hijacking your brain, because it's really, what is it doing? It's just overtaking anything else. If you've known someone with an addiction that's progressed to the point where like nothing else matters, just getting that hit. Nothing else matters, getting that alcohol. I had a friend, now it's going back on 5 years or so, alcoholic, and his addiction took him. It ruined his life, ruined his family, ruined his relationships, and it ruined him. And dead before he was 60. Addictions are just devastating. And I can tell you, I've been even in my own little church back home in Pennsylvania. In our church, like 250 people or so, right? A couple of people that we knew over the years were taken as a result of overdose, right? These are from families that are just like, regular families like you and I, and just people get addicted to something and it just overtakes their lives. And so addiction is just, it's devastating, folks. It really is. But this way, just to give you a little bit of an idea what's going on with addiction, let me play one more video for you all, because I think that you'll find this interesting. So yeah, let's go here. This is a 4-minute video. I think you'll find it reinforcing. Here.
Talk about the things going on in your life and have a life.
Addiction is defined.
Okay, so let's see how this is.
control over doing, taking, using something to the point where it can be harmful to you. Previous to understanding science, it was thought that addiction resulted from a lack of willpower and was a moral failing. But we now know that addiction is a physiological disease. It changes the brain structure in ways that can alter the way it works and process information. To understand how that happens, we start by thinking about reward and the brain's natural reward system. The reward pathway's primary function is to reinforce sets of behaviors. Evolutionarily, it began as a way to indicate to us that actions that help us survive are good and we should keep doing them. This is mediated through a chemical called dopamine. Following an appropriate behavior, the reward pathway releases a small burst of dopamine. That burst of dopamine is a satisfying jolt, encouraging you to repeat the same action in the future. Dopamine will in turn also act on areas responsible for memory and movement, which helps us automatically build up memories for what is good for survival. The problem is that addictive substances hijack our natural reward system. Every substance has slightly different actions on the brain, but one thing all addictive drugs have in common is that they produce a pleasurable surge of dopamine. Addictive drugs all cause dopamine to flood the reward pathway 10 times higher than a natural reward would. Over chronic use, nothing else natural is quite as rewarding. In fact, as substance use increases, the circuits adapt and reduce their sensitivity to dopamine, a phenomenon known as tolerance. For example, let's say a person takes cocaine for the first time. The reward system receives a huge burst of dopamine. But as the person takes more frequently, cocaine will be overstimulating the brain with dopamine. This will cause the brain to adapt to these chronically high levels of dopamine. To compensate and adapt to this new normal, the brain reduces the number of dopamine receptors available in the reward system and releases less dopamine. As a result, that person will feel the need to increase the amount of drug they take so that they can reach the level of high that they're used to. But it's not just the reward system that's affected by this tolerance, since dopamine is also involved in other brain mechanisms. Other brain regions involving decision-making, memory, and judgment also get physically disrupted as a result. The overall effect is to have drug-seeking behavior driven by habit rather than conscious thought, like a reflex instead of a choice. This biological basis helps to explain why addiction really is a brain disease, not a matter of willpower. The stigma that accompanies addiction only makes seeking treatment more difficult.
Okay. All right, another good short video. Just reinforcing what we were talking about here regarding with the neurotransmitters and such. All right. So these nerve chemicals are vital. They're very important. We need them. They have a role to play. And when we introduce substances that can hijack the system, not good things happen as a result. All right. Let's go back to sharing my screen. All right, here we go. So here we're at, as far as this slide here, and looking at the neurotransmitters here, serotonin, having issues with depression, having issues with your mood and such, also a role in memory and learning and such, also serotonin, dopamine, really important, acetylcholine, really important, epinephrine, also these are important nerve chemicals. And then GABA, you'll see here, inhibits the release of other neurotransmitters. So these are major nerve chemicals that the body naturally produces and can be affected by things that we do. and things that we take in. And again, too, just of note there, right, as far as like with addictions and such, I think many of us have probably had someone in our life or relative or friend or whoever that has had some type of issue with addiction, and it's devastating. It's devastating illness and such. Take a look here, neuromodulators. And know this, that in the video you saw that these nerve chemicals, these neurotransmitters, they need receptors, right? So they need receptors. And so if we block the receptors, is that going to block the role of the nerve transmitter, that neurotransmitter? Yes, it will. And so this could be problems with a gland functioning, a muscle contracting. Not good things can happen if those receptors are blocked, okay? But know that we can't continually have that nerve chemical just out there and just stimulating those receptors. We have to remove it, and then when needed again, release it again. So you'll see here that these neuromodulators, they can amplify or dampen the effects of a neurotransmitter, so of this nerve chemical. That's an important thing. So endorphins inhibit nerves from releasing substance P. Endorphins are like your body's natural analgesic, like a pain reliever, okay? Have you ever heard of people having endorphins as a result of exercising or being involved in an accident, right? And they're not even thinking about the fact that they might have a really bad cut on their arm or leg, and they just keep on doing something in order to help maybe a child or someone else that's in the car during the wreck, right? These are kind of things that can be released, these chemicals that are really important for the body and for our survival. Neurotransmitter molecules must be removed from that synapse, from that area where they're being released. If they're not, that can be a problem. And you saw that in the video there. We're just going to go a little bit further. So I talked to you a little bit earlier there about touching something hot or touching something sharp. And reflexes protect us. So not only are these chemicals very important, the whole protection of the human body, but these reflexes also. Simplest nerve pathways do not involve the brain. So you moved your hand away from something hot or something sharp before your brain was saying, hey, dummy, don't touch what's hot or what's sharp. No, you just do it automatically. It's a reflex arc, okay? But how about this? There are other types of reflexes. So for a baby, for example, right? A baby, if you hold a baby up to you, if the baby's head is facing you, right? And you start pushing it up against your body, it's going to root or look for the breast of a mom to feed it, right? If you just touch a baby, the cheek on a baby, it'll turn its head to if you're touching the cheek on that side. That's what goes on. That's that rooting reflex that goes on. There are other reflexes that can take place also for developmentally wise for infants and young ones. Let's see here. Neurons interact in circuits in the brain and the spinal cord. Let's go to this next slide here. And what you're seeing here is that just a group of, so you'll see here groups of these neurons, and you'll see the covering, that sheath, that myelin, right? That important insulator, allowing for fast transmission of nerve messages. So look here, this is showing you as far as a response to some type of stimuli, as far as let's read here first here. A fruit is being loaded into a bowl, puts weight on an arm muscle, and it stretches it. So the stretch reflex, okay? Will the bowl drop? Now, depending upon how heavy, right? But if you're just adding a little bit of weight at a time and your muscles are able to handle it, your body will adapt and still take care of the weight. So no, because the muscle spindles right here in the muscle sheath are also stretched. And as a result, this reflex here is going to then send more information. We want more muscle fibers contracting in order to hold up this bowl. Okay. So you'll see here that stretching stimulates sensory receptors in the muscle spindle. Action potentials, this electricity propagates towards the spinal cord, zoom, goes to the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, acts on terminals of the sensory neuron, release a neurotransmitter, right, acetylcholine, that diffuses across the synaptic cleft and stimulates the motor neuron. Stimulation is strong enough to generate action potentials that self-propagate, that just continually going in one direction. The acts on terminals of the motor neuron synapse. There's a connection between the muscle and nerve. And you'll see here in the stretched muscle, right here, that stretched muscle, that biceps brachii. This acetylcholine will be released from the motor neurons to the axon terminals, stimulate those muscle cells to do what? More more muscle cells, muscle fibers to contract. Stimulation makes the stretched muscle contract. Ongoing stimulations and contractions hold the bowl steady. So this is the stretch reflex that's taking place in a muscle. So there's these receptors that are present, and it's a reflex that's taking place. All right, so next slide here. And we're going to end with this slide for today. So I've mentioned this to you early on in the lecture today. Central nervous system, peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, everything else, right? And so you have, this is important to know these numbers. I don't ask you to know a lot of numbers, but these are important. 31 pairs, so that means pairs, bilateral, both sides. 31 pairs of spinal nerves coming directly off of the spinal cord. And there are 12 pairs of these cranial nerves. Remember earlier on, I talked to you about these cranial nerves coming directly off of the brain. Okay. Now, you'll see here, afferent nerves bring signals toward the nervous system. Efferent nerves carry messages away. Afferent and efferent. You need to know the difference between them. That'll be on the quiz, I'm sure. Okay. Afferent, efferent. So let's go to this next slide, this slide right here. I provided this all for you. I added this to the PowerPoint just so that you can see. So afferent is taking information from the sensory receptors, bringing it to the spinal cord. Efferent, nerve flow, taking information away from the spinal cord from the central nervous system to a muscle, to a gland, to an organ, whatever it may be, right? It's taking information away. So afferent, bringing toward, efferent, away. And lastly here again, those spinal nerves, they're coming directly off of the spinal cord, carry signals to and from the spinal cord. Again, a part of that whole reflex process, okay? Whether it's the stretch reflex or whether it's the withdrawal reflex, just examples of a couple right there. And then you'll see here, the pairs of cranial nerves, they're also very important and send direct information directly to the brain. Now, consists of somatic and autonomic divisions. And so we'll talk about this. I mentioned it already earlier today when I said to you that sympathetic nervous system, this is the one where like, you're involved in something and you're like all jacked up and ready to go, whether it's to fight or to run. Sympathetic, fight or flight. Parasympathetic, you all are just sitting there right now. You're resting, right? You're relaxing. Well, I hope, not so relaxing, falling asleep, but you're relaxing. That's parasympathetic, okay? Primarily in our lives, we should be under more parasympathetic influence and control. Sympathetic, only necessary for survival. Okay? All right, we're gonna stop here for today, finish up on Thursday. And so let's close out our stop recording.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, folks, so I just wanted to end out our video here today regarding with lab work and just show you that this is in Documents and Resources. I've mentioned it to you before, but this is what you're going to be required to know for the lab quiz at the end of next month, last week in October. And so you'll have a word bank for this because, again, you are non-science majors, so providing a word bank, and you'll have to be able to identify with the questions for the lab quiz regarding whether the skin, the integumentary system, right? The skeletal system, these are the bones that you'll have to understand and know where they're located, and be able to see them and be able to identify them. The muscles, as far as these are ones that I'm asking you to know. So many of these are common, like the pectoralis muscles, the obliques, the rectus abdominis, your abs, your traps, your latissimus, your lats, your biceps and triceps, your deltoid. Many of these muscles you already know. Hamstrings, the quadriceps, right? The glutes, you know. So many of them, so it's not many that you're not understanding or don't know, but you'll be tested on these as well as this information for the brain and for the special senses. So it's really important that you take this lab time now. So we're not doing any more lecture. You know, you've watched the lecture, you've been participated with that, and now you need to start spending time really acclimating yourself to what goes on as far as all these different body parts and where they're located and being able to identify them. Okay, so you please spend the time, right? You have the time to now focus on this. I'm going to be opening up some more information as far as in coursework regarding sheets that you can do labeling to help you to learn these different anatomical parts and such. And so if you have any questions, please reach out to me and I'll help answer them and help you. Very good.